Donna, just waiting for us. Just going to need to get Amir Hassan.
Mark's trying to remember where he knows you from. Not throwing it. There you go. Oh, he doesn't know you too.
He must have known that. Come on, you get 3 chances. Got it. No, that's, you've only got 2 left. Well, you'll see. Certainly not like national conferences for now, anyway. Yeah.
Amir, David, can I invite you on the stage? Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is our last seminar of the day, our traditional end of festivities or of conversations we've had. This is the Q&A forum. Now, this is very informal. I'll introduce our panel in a few moments' time. I think I'm waiting for one person. That's true. Okay, but what I will say to people is obviously I've got some prepared questions just to get the ball rolling, but this really is about you asking questions of our panel of experts. So please. There's space there for you, in the middle. There's space there for you in the middle. But what I would say is this is your opportunity to have whatever questions, whatever you answered on, whatever subject, answered by our panel of experts. So I'll tell you who's up there, and maybe that'll temper your responses. We have Des Broster at the end there, who's a director of safeguarding and licensing for the Vizu Group. We have, you can clap at each time if you want. We have Amir Hassan, our old friend and sponsor of our exhibition, who is the CEO of Minicabit, the country's leading aggregator. Surely worth a ripple, please. We have Mark Jennings, who was up here earlier today, so thank you for coming back again. I'll tell you who he's from. It's from the GMB. This time he's representing the GMB of Southend and the cooperative of Southend as well. Okay, we have Perry McMillan from Unite the Union in Southampton. Obviously, Perry's got some fans amongst us here. And we have Dave Lorry, who has filled in, thankfully, because we were so far behind, who is the CEO of Safe Systems CCTV Limited. And lastly, and by far the most important person on the panel, we have our own editor of Private Hire and Taxi Monthly, the director of the National Private Hire and Taxi Association, Mrs. Donna Shorts. So, as I said, I have some prepared questions, but let's throw it open straight away. Has anyone got a question they want to ask our panel of experts? Well, you have to have, give you the microphone.
Good afternoon. I just want to ask you little questions if you are expertise in any of the fields, because when we recruit points on our license and our license is suspended or revoked, so what sort of action, what sort of advice you can give regarding that matter? Okay, so it's a licensing interest. Have we got anybody who wants to proffer a response?
Shall I take that one? Yeah, I can take that one. Yeah. Well,
what the gentleman was saying, Donna, was that when you accumulate points on a license and it's revoked, what measures have you got? What recompense can you have? Obviously legal advice, but please, I mean, Mark, I think you were going to answer this. I know Donna's going first. Yes, Donna, go on.
Yeah. As you know, there's 374 different licensing authorities across England, Wales and Scotland, and they all have their own game plan, including the number of points that have to appear on a DVLA before the licence holder is either put in front of committee or indeed the licence is revoked. What has to be looked into is why those points have been put on and what disciplinary measures each council is taking, which again is different across the board. If, for example, there are 9 points accumulated and they're all speeders, all right, the council will be acting reasonably if they put the licence holder in front of committee for irresponsible driving. But that should not be automatic revocation. That should be investigated by a committee, hopefully a committee who is somewhat informed. If, however, the points are accumulated by virtue of something more serious, for example, insurance transgressions or dangerous driving, or these extreme reasons for which points are issued on a licence, that in itself is enough reason to go in front of committee. Whether it would be the licence will be revoked, again, is down to the individual council, and that's where the difficulty lies. What we're hoping is there will be some degree of national minimum standards being brought in to eradicate those differences and to look at the various motivations behind it.
Mark, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, and there's also from your own driver's side, it comes down to, like Donna said, how severe the actual points are. If you're just talking about points, you can actually get to 12 points and more and still keep your licence, because it comes down to a thing called fit and proper. And there's a good little case on this, Justice Bingham in McCall versus Rushcliffe, and he explains what fit and proper means. So if you ever go into front of a licensing, go and look up McCall versus Rushcliffe, go and look up what Justice Bingham said, what is fit and proper. If you fit that criteria, it's a very, very powerful tool, because it's a High Court judgment. And take it with you, take your representative with you, join a union, don't join one when you're in trouble, join one before, and then you'll get proper representation, you get proper legal advice, and then you will have this. They'll give it to you anyway if you're in a union. This is a very powerful thing. How fit and proper are you when you get in front of licensing, and how well you can explain yourself, the situation, why the points were gathered, over what period of time, etc., etc. I just got a guy off who had 12 points on his licence, and he's still driving a cab today, a few weeks ago. So it can be done.
So I think it's getting the proper advice at an early time. Gentleman over there wants to make answer a question.
Afternoon. My name is Steve Lucas. I work from Eastleigh Borough Council, which is next to Southampton in the south of England. Are the panel aware of the Institute of Licensing's guidance document that was published in 2018 that specifies that any driver, either Hackney or private hire, that reaches 7 points at any time in their driving time for the council will have their licence suspended for a minimum of 5 years before they can reapply for their licence. Does the panel feel that that is draconian, out of touch with the rest of society, and perhaps puts taxi drivers and private hire drivers, they see them as a lower class of people?
Okay,
and they
so I
need
think the
to-
question is, are you aware of it?
Thank you.
And B, do you think it's a draconian question? I think Perry's going to answer this first, and then Des, do you want to answer that question? Okay, so Perry first.
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, obviously aware of it. It's actually revocation. It's not suspension. It's more serious than that. The problem we've got is that we've got a licensing manager who, like a previous licensing manager, seems to want to make a name for himself nationally, not just locally. And despite the task and finish report that's coming out, he's gone ahead with this. The people involved in this are actually one of the Southampton legal solicitors who tell me that's not a vested interest, and Philip Colwell from Uber, the QC from Uber. So there's people involved in these recommendations and guidelines that do show concern. Clearly, we have to get active on this, and we'd urge everyone else to take note of what's happening, because it could happen to you. What we're going to do is lobby all the licensing councillors before the meeting. Eastleigh's the month before us, so we've got to get our act together. The reason we haven't done this 6-7 months ago is because a lot of licensing councillors are only just elected. They were civilians.
Are we saying what's regional today might be national tomorrow?
Absolutely, absolutely. And this
Okay.
is why we're going to put a big fight on this one and get something going.
Des, do you want to add to this?
Well, currently I work for a group called VZU, which is a national private hire and taxi company. Prior to that, I was head of licensing in Leeds City Council for 15 years. But I'm not a gamekeeper turned poacher. I work there for a particular reason. When I saw these recommendations that came out, it concerned me. Because one of the basic principles of the law, when you're making decisions in the civil context, for officers like yourself, is that you can't fetter your discretion. You can't have it fettered. And I don't see anything there that sort of says, how do we balance this? Another example, taking it away from, talk about mobile phones. They say 5 years. Well, actually, they're asking you to make a decision which national legislation doesn't make. It doesn't say if you get a conviction for using a mobile phone, you'll be disqualified for 5 years. But the recommendation here is that it is. And I don't see the balance in that. Similarly, when you talk about criminal assaults, we know that assaults go through a really wide range, from common assaults as a young person up to wounding with intent, which is the most serious one with life imprisonment before you come into manslaughter and that type of thing. They talk about a range of sentence which is all the same, and it doesn't make sense to me. And I think it's leaving officers and local authorities wide open to challenge, and it'll take you right back to square one if there isn't the principle of taking each case on its own merits. So I've got serious concerns about the recommendations. And I might say, because it's somehow linked to DFT's work, I've no concerns about their work.
Okay, on a slightly, before I open up the question again, we've spoken to some more panellists. Can I ask a question of Amir Hassan of Minicabit? What is the role of aggregators in today's market, and how do they align with other sources of customers that cab private hire vehicle operators are targeting?
Hi. I say that, so Minicab started about 7 years ago, and we're at a really exciting juncture for the industry, actually. So we're seeing three big forces happening. One is the shift to online bookings from customers. It's inevitable. It's happened in every other sector. In the UK, in aggregate, we see only 20% of the UK's cab revenues are transacted online. That could only go up. The second factor, whether you like it or not, is with the rise of ride-hailing apps like Uber, there's a greater attention from the customer on price and quality, and more expectation on transparency. So the accountability of fleets to be able to compete on those two factors is becoming much more important. And the third, which we've covered in a previous session, is the big shift towards electric vehicles, right? And that'll definitely have implications for suppliers as well as the customers. So aggregators like Minicab, our expectation is that we can provide and add value for both stakeholders, customers and cab providers. First of all, we can level the playing field. So if you are a small fleet with only 5 cars, you can still offer a quality service and competitive pricing against a larger fleet. I think the important point is not just around price, it really is around quality. I mean, the biggest frustration for me is that when people talk about Uber and similar apps, ultimately they're ordering a driver coming up in a Prius, right? And that is something that every fleet in the land is being able to offer anyway. So the ability to showcase that to customers, I think is a huge opportunity. The other important point is the source of customers. So when you are in the online world, the channels become much more sophisticated, right? And so whether you're targeting them through social media or paid spend on Google and elsewhere, the ability to retain those customers online, all those tools have really become much more advanced. And so I'd hope that with a platform like Minicab, we can acquire customers for you much more efficiently, and a way of hopefully a higher spend than you might be able to do offline. And hopefully the proof is in the pudding. So we're the third most visited cab website after Uber and Addison Lee. Uber's had a few.
The way forward then, Amir, the way forward.
Yeah.
That's the aggregators, the way forward?
I'd say so. They will coexist, right? If you look at when EasyJet came out, it didn't Expedia and Booking.com and so on all came at the same time. You know, you've seen it with Just Eat and Deliveroo and so on. You know, you've seen Hilton.com and Booking.com coexist as well. So I don't see it as a zero-sum game. And I think the exciting thing is with all that whole shift online, I think cab demand itself has never been higher, right? So it's really up to us to meet that.
Okay. I've got a question. Not lastly, sorry. I've got a question for Dave Lorry here. Why does a dashcam not do the job?
It's quite simple, really. If you look at the Information Commissioner's Office Code of Practice for the use of CCTV, if you look at the 6 principles of GDPR, it lists all the things that a CCTV must have in order to be ICO compliant. One of those is that if there is audio, it must be panic switch controlled. You can't put a panic switch onto the audio of a dashcam. It's either on or it's off, simple as that. Another one is that data must be encrypted, which in the case of most dashcams it isn't. Another one is that the devices must be securely mounted, which a dashcam is just stuck to a windscreen. And another one is that the data must be secured away from potential theft. So if you imagine the scenario of somebody getting into a vehicle and snatching down a dashcam, they've got all that data and it's not encrypted. They can plug that SD card into any computer and see the faces of anybody that's been in the vehicle before, ping that all over Facebook, and straight away you're in breach of Section 55 of the Data Protection Act.
Is this being phased out anytime soon, or?
Dashcams themselves,
Yeah.
a lot of local authorities are now becoming far more aware of the reasons and risks of why dashcams aren't allowed.
Okay. A question from the audience. Anyone want to at this point? Right. Yes, a gentleman over there. We'll get your microphone over. I think we've got one. Oh.
The gentleman here was talking about points on the DVLA licence, but a lot of councils now are going over to points-based systems, penalising drivers, so you could get up to, say, 12 points for various offences, from parking on a rank to applying for hire, or etc., etc. There doesn't seem to be a national limit on what offence carries what points. I say a lot of more councils are introducing these schemes. Our local council is investigating currently on that scheme. Has anybody had that scheme in their area? Does it work? Is it any good? Should we be fighting it? The sort of things we would like to ask if anybody knows.
I think Dave's going to answer this, is he?
Yeah, that's something that was pushed towards being introduced in Rosendale Council. I think they were aiming for it about 5 or 6 years ago. As chair of the association at that time, I took them to task on it, and we actually got it blocked. Because a lot of the things that they were talking about applying points for were things that are perfectly legal for taxi drivers. For example, not wearing a seatbelt. Well, hang on a minute. If you've got passengers in, you don't have to wear your seatbelt. Using your horn as an audible warning device in order to alert passengers that you're there. Well, hang on a minute. The police tell us and advise us, because we're carrying cash, do not get out of your vehicle unless it's absolutely necessary. So the things that they were talking about introducing as being punishable offences or receiving points for were actually perfectly legal, and therefore you shouldn't get points at all. So I actually ran the scenario past them and I said, well, hang on a minute, let's look at what you're actually using here. Use of a mobile device, okay, or which included the use of a taxi radio. So you've cleared on a job. You key up, you say clear. That's 6 points. They then give you another job. You key in to say, thank you, on my way. That's another 6 points. You then arrive at the destination, you pip your horn gently to let them know that you're there. That's another 3 points. You park on the pavement to allow traffic to pass you so that you're not causing congestion while you're waiting for the passenger to come out. That's another 6 points. Then you radio through, hang on a minute, you've just lost your licence. You've not even done a job yet. So there are ways that local associations can challenge these things. Then, of course, you've got to look at the legality of it, which is quite simply, no points or penalties shall be issued by anybody other than a magistrate in a court of law. Now, the thing that you're looking at is local authorities will dismiss that as being, well, we're not issuing points onto your DVLA licence, only onto your council-issued licence. So it's something that as local associations you need to be looking at the details and the legalities of it and really analyse what you're giving points for.
The devil's in the detail.
The devil's in the detail. Because what the councils will do is they will say, well, as it stands at the moment, the only option that we've got if you're found to have done something that is breach of licensing conditions is to call you in front of the licensing committee with the option to either take no action, revoke your licence, suspend your licence, or ask you to go on a driving test. So the introduction of such penalty point systems gives you an aggregate and a way to, if it's within 12 months, you might only breach licensing conditions once, in which case you only get 6 points, and then there's no need for licensing committee. 6 months later, those are going to drop off, and you're good to go again. So it gives a rolling scale as opposed to a committee.
Okay, we'll muster it on. A question for Des Broster here. How important is the structuring of safeguarding training?
Well, I think it came as a big shock to everybody, the introduction of safeguarding training. But the first thing I'm going to say, it was absolutely vital. And it's not just vital to communities, it's vital to drivers as well. Because it's so easy for drivers to fall into traps where friendliness becomes familiarity, and before you know it, they're in a terrible web. But safeguarding is a massive issue, and it's well evidenced. But what concerns me is that there's no national standard to safeguarding, and I've seen examples of online training and testing, but you've no idea who's taking that training or testing, and that's just unacceptable. I've seen some outfits come along and with some devised packages, and I just think, would a local authorities, Children's Safeguarding Unit or Adult Safeguarding Unit, actually approve this. And I think too many local authorities take the easy way out on this. But the big secret in this is do not treat the driver as the suspect. This can be tremendously beneficial to drivers, it can be tremendously beneficial to communities, but it is essential training so that drivers are well aware and contribute to all of the issues that confront them so often.
Okay. Question from the audience? Anyone to ask? Question? Yes, gentleman over there. Well on, wait for the microphone.
Just coming back to penalty point schemes and the scheme for how long before you can reapply for your licence.
Yeah.
On council I've dealt with raised a penalty point scheme. Clearly, I don't think anybody knows what they're really doing. I've yet to see anything on penalty point scheme that's actually looked at it. It involves risk management, and I've seen no risk management of any description that supports penalty point schemes. Likewise, on the period that somebody waits after a misdemeanour before they can reapply for their licence, does this come back from Jim Button's thing last year where I raised the point on adult cautions and
Okay, I think
for which the period before you could reapply for a licence was 4 years. Where did that come from? It's nonsense. And how do you justify it? Because I haven't read Jim Button's pamphlet on that.
Well, Jim's not here.
No,
so
I appreciate that, but people were supporting
it's a specific
it.
question for our panel today rather than a statement. I'm sure they'll answer, but...
Well, no, but this seems to be something that was being accepted last year and by other people. The question is, when I've looked at this, the thing it was based on seemed to be holistic data, where we're looking at a specific group, and there must be lots of information that you can see from Private Hire and Taxi Monthly of things that have gone wrong. You know,
Okay,
should
well,
that
Donna,
not
do
be
you want to
the
answer
basis
this,
of
or
it?
do you want to answer this question? David, if you're quick, so I do want to get on. So,
I think what you're getting at there is prevention versus cure. I think what you'll find that from the trade, it's more perceived as being guilty before being proven innocent. I think that's the difference.
okay. I've got a question for Perry. Your council specifically is currently proposing what you deem to be really strict, over-the-top policies. I think actually we've dealt with that one. Let me ask you another. Yeah, let me ask you. How strong is union representation, say for both Unite and the GMB who are here in your district, and what effect, if any, does that have in negotiations with your council?
Well, just to clarify at the start, you said Southampton Unite, but it's the South Coast. And we actually cover Milton Keynes in our area. We go all the way down to Canterbury. So what we have is a swapping of information between the two unions. And I've been down to Portsmouth Council and actually give advice to their council when they were introducing CCTV and stuff like that. So a lot of councils welcome you coming on board. Those that seem to hold back from it, it depends who's running the council. If you've got a Labour council, a lot of the Labour councillors may be union members. So that helps when you're trying to negotiate with them. So that's always a factor in it. But we do find that often councils will sit and listen to you if you're putting over a perspective where you're backed by a union. You know that you've got people backing you, you'll work together, you're representing your members. So all in all, yeah, it works. It's not perfect, but it certainly works.
Okay. A question for Donna before I flow it over to the audience once again. Donna, where are we up to with the task and finish recommendations, the government's response and the draft statutory guidance document? What's the latest
It's funny you
state
should
of play?
say that, because our colleagues are here this afternoon. Right, okay. I was one of the 11 members of the Task and Finish group who set out to tackle seriously the existing difficulties that exist in the industry. Everybody knows that whatever happened with the Law Commission didn't happen, and therefore the government's response to the task and finish recommendations is being taken very, very seriously. Now, a lot of people are saying, oh, we've got to wait for new legislation and there's Brexit in Parliament and all that. Yeah, that's true. The B word is blocking a lot of other issues going through the House of Commons and House of Lords. However, of the 34 task and finish recommendations, 22 of them do not fall back on having to have new legislation. They can be got at and be developed as we are speaking, as indeed a lot of them are, such as new best practice, such as the consultation on statutory guidance, which finished on the 22nd of April. Those are the kinds of things which can be and are being tackled right now, this minute. The most important thing that we as an industry can do is to respond to the Department for Transport and tell them exactly where you are up to with these various issues, such as cross-border, such as hate crime, such as disabled issues, because they need to know in order to take these task and finish recommendations forward. How do you put a timescale on it? Don't know, because there's a general election pending. There could be change of personnel, as is the usual thing. But all we can do is keep on slogging and communicating and getting the message forward to the DFT and indeed anybody else who will listen to say what these problems are. And there's been a hell of a lot of problems being discussed here today, which I'm sure the DFT will benefit from having heard. Okay.
I think Des wants to add to this.
Just a quick note about the DFT. Today's DFT is the most responsive DFT I've ever come across in 15 years.
Take a bow, Thomas.
Yep. And the only thing that stops them is the speed of politicians and not the efforts of the officers within the DFT. I think they've done a great job. They've listened to the trade. They understand it now, something they never did before, and they deserve that credit.
Okay. A question for Mark over here. I've got one that was sent in. The Deregulation Act of 2015 is being blamed for every aspect of out-of-area licensed vehicles taking work from those who work in their own district, in particular from app-based ride-hailing companies. Is this correct?
It is. That's what people are blaming, but it's... what do you mean by correct? Do you mean, is it correct that that people can cross-border because of the Deregulation Act?
Is the statement that I've just read out correct?
Well, the statement, everyone's blaming the Deregulation Act, but you can't... the Deregulation Act is just an amendment to Section 55A of the Miscellaneous Provisions Act. And quite simply, before the Act came in, an operator could only subcontract a job to another operator in the same licensed borough. And since the Act came in, the operator can now subcontract a job to another operator in a separate licensed borough that is not the same. However, some people seem to think that then that subcontracting means that you can subcontract the job to a vehicle and a driver in a completely different area and use a completely different driver and vehicle from those areas and work and operate your vehicles all over the country. And that is utter rubbish. You can't. It's never been allowed. It's been abused, and it's been, it's been blamed for it. And everyone's going, "Oh, the Deregulation Act," was probably the worst title to give an act ever. The word deregulation, because everyone assumed that it's you can do what you like. Yes, and it's not.
Okay. The audience, I think we've got. You asked if I'll ask this gentleman here. I think this gentleman here with the blue shirt needs a microphone.
Well, I think when you talk about deregulation, but you're very lucky that it didn't fall through the full force, because when they were talking about single-tier system, it would have brought a whole lot open a can of worms, and we were very lucky that a lot of people campaigned against it, and we didn't go down that route. That it didn't get, and I think a lot of councils are to blame, because when you talk about out-of-town drivers working, because there's a company with a lot of money that's involved in that, a lot of councils don't have a backbone in them, or they're too scared to tackle exactly what you just said. I know it stands out, and I've made, over the years, I've made the same point in every meeting in our council, and every time they've just took a back step, and they haven't enforced that. And I think the councils literally need to grow a bone and start standing up to that. That's it.
Well, I think you've hit an important chord there.
It has been made a long time, but we've been at it for the last 4 or 5 years, and nobody has stood up. And I don't think they are going to stand up. And the second thing on points that I want to say, do a lot of people realise with this new conviction policy, and they're talking about 6 points or 7 points or whatever, I think it's disgraceful for a government or the councils to put this point systems that we talked about, to put this 7 points limit on, when they're asking some of the drivers, especially Hackney carriage drivers, to invest £60,000. Now, if a Hackney carriage driver goes out, spends £60,000, gets a loan, 6 months down the line,
gets banned,
gets 7 points, gets banned, he's self-employed. Who's going to pay money for his repayments? Is that literally you're going to send people, on the street? They're going to go homeless because they've got that. It's just like everything else. They never think about it.
Okay, well, I don't think that question needs responding, because I think that's automatic. Unless, Dave, do you want to quickly respond to that?
Yeah, I would say that I'd agree with exactly what you're saying. The Deregulation Act would have gone a lot further. For example, one of the things that they were talking about as well was allowing a private hire vehicle to be driven by an unlicensed driver if it's off duty. So there was an awful lot of things that were taken out of it. But I think to echo the comments there, the Deregulation Act is being blamed for it. Yes, it is being blamed, but it's actually the fact that it's the misinterpretation or the abuse of the Deregulation Act that is the fault. As was said before, vehicles are being used. They think, there's a classic example that if you have a licence that's been issued by any Greater Manchester authority, you can receive a booking from Manchester. No, you can't. That's not the Deregulation Act. One of the statements by one of the app companies is that if you have a licence that's been issued by any of the 12 district authorities within the region of Greater Manchester, you can receive bookings from Central Manchester office. No, you can't. That's the 3 licence rule. So it's the misinterpretation and abuse of the Deregulation Act that is to blame.
Do you agree with us or disagree?
I'm going to add on to that. He's absolutely correct. It's not only the abuse of the misinterpretation of the Act, it's also the abuse of the so-called triple licensing lock. It's also the abuse of the right to roam, which has only come out since Mr. Colvin decided he had, invented this phrase. And it is the way they say there is no restriction on where the journey starts or ends, and it makes it sound as though they are correct. They are not correct. They are abusing the system, they're abusing the law, and the gentleman over there is absolutely correct. You cannot have a licensed authority in one area operate in another area, regardless
so
of the
just
law.
By your comments, Mark, I've noticed Donna agreeing with that, and David, I think that's the panel is in agreement. On a separate matter, I want to ask a Amira question, which we've got here. What are in general terms, what are customer expectations regarding low or zero emission taxis, and how can operators respond to them?
Yeah, it's funny how things have changed. So about 4 years ago, we ran a survey with Heathrow Airport, who's one of our partners, asking customers if you had a zero-emission vehicle and a regular cab, would you be prepared to pay more for the electric vehicle cab, and half the survey said yes, and it was even higher in the younger demographic. At the same time, we actually ran a promotion where, rather than getting £5 off your first cab, your cab trip, we donate £5 to the World Trust. Hardly any uptake, right? So now, with the introduction of clean air zones and so on, that sentiment is changing. What we see is, first of all, with the investment in electric vehicles, it's clearly a consideration for a fleet to make. And what we're doing is, first of all, in our booking flow on our website and through our partnerships, like with Stansted and many others, we're going to be spotlighting zero emissions as an option. That's been there, but it's going to be more prominent. Secondly, for example, we actually worked with a Tesla Model X fleet based at Stansted, and we worked with them to give them a lot of the data on the actual routes of demand, the most popular routes and the optimal prices that people are paying. And what they did from that is they actually built a very good, steady business at Stansted Airport for their 7 Model X's. And from that, they've now set up a second base at Heathrow Airport. And so that for us is a template for how, whether you're a pure EV fleet or you're investing in a few EV cars within your existing fleet, we can carve out a separate offering for you to help you recover the investment in those fleets. And over time, if I really fast forward into the future, I think right now, EV cars are just about the emissions, but a lot of them will start to come with extra features inside the car, right? Whether there'll be more infotainment in the back for the passengers and all sorts of other attributes. And so we'll surface those to the customers as they are booking as well.
Okay, for the floor, any questions? Got this gentleman here. Just
Good afternoon.
your last question today. You've asked 3. Remember that.
I would like to ask a little question, because when I read 34 recommendations and the response from the government, they was fully emphasizing the safety of the customers, but they were not left any provision for the drivers who work day in, day out to helping the customers and going through the system. So obviously, if it is 73 people was murdered, the driver was murdered by the customers, where is our safety stand? Because it is abuse which is the customer give it. We respect them, but they still give the abuse to us. So where we stand? Because they are not literally a little sentence that what sort of work we do.
Okay. Donna? Donna?
Okay. That gets me going, of course. As you know, last year we kicked off a campaign for driver safety. And during the task and finish meetings, on several occasions, I did raise the point that the remit, as you know, of licensing authorities and central government is passenger safety. What about the drivers? Now, this is why we kicked off our PHTM and National Association driver campaign, safety campaign last year, including the No Excuse for Abuse stickers and the Zero Tolerance policy statements for operator bases. Now that's spreading quite widely. It needs to spread even more. But what we're trying to do more than anything is to raise awareness that drivers are the public as well, and they must be regarded as important for their safety as well as the passengers. Sure. So we are doing everything in our remit as a publication and a national association to raise that point at every juncture with national government, with the DFT, and we are asking for any and all bits of evidence, and God knows that the paper's full of them every month, of attacks against drivers, physical, verbal, attacks on the vehicles, all that kind of thing. And that will be compiled and submitted to national government.
Okay. I think Perry wanted to put his hand up first. So.
Yeah, I just want to back up the campaign that Private Hire Taxi Monthly is doing. I think it's a fantastic campaign. Fully support it. But I think the thing is as well, the council seem to have an attitude towards taxi drivers and private hire drivers. There's an attitude when they choose to, we're self-employed businessmen, or when they choose to, we're employees. but they don't seem to get the perspective that when someone gets into our cab, that's our vehicle. Show respect, and we'll show you respect. That's the way it should work. And unfortunately, as a society now, we've seen with Brexit and that, there's a high rise in racism and stuff that's going on. There's a lot of guys out there, they're out there doing a job. They're getting someone home safely for all different reasons. They don't deserve to be getting the abuse they're getting. And this is something that's got to start with a taxi driver. We don't tolerate it. We've got to all unite together against it. And councils need to realise the valuable contribution we make in getting people around safely.
Very true, true, true. Okay, I'm going to wrap it up unless we have some more questions. We've got a question from the gentleman over there.
Just a very quick one, thank you. I'd just like to say quickly, just summarising everything, the attitude that we get from licensing. I have put a direct question to a licensing officer. As drivers, as employees or self-employed people, as individuals, we think that you should consider when you make your decisions our livelihood and our safety. And a licensing officer has turned around and said, our only remit is the safety of the public. Your livelihood is no concern of ours. And I just think their ethos needs to change a bit to reflect.
It's all about
that
education.
we are not just insignificant. We should be treated with dignity and respect, and our investment, our commitment, and the fact that we are there doing a potentially dangerous job. If you look at police officers, they have slab vests on, they're supported by colleagues. We're out there on our own, often drinking with people that may be emotionally volatile, may be subjected to drink or drugs. And we have to deal with all
I
these
think your
things.
point will be echoed by the audience. I think it will be echoed by our panel. I don't think it needs comment on it. Yeah, if you want to quickly.
If you don't mind, because I know you want to come in and say
Yeah,
something
pleasure.
as well. If any of you have looked at our website and the campaigns that we're throwing on the Facebook groups and things like that, the main hashtag that we're using now is hashtag turning the tables. And you're quite right, we are members of the public. We are out there in a volatile situation. We are subject to attacks. We're subject to false allegations. And as much as these things are about public safety, you're quite right, we are members of the public as well. And it is time to turn that around. It is time to get the respect back in the trade where it belongs. And it's about time that these false allegations were identifiable as being false. That's the reason, that's the terminology and the reason for hashtag turning the tables.
Des, do you want to add to this?
Yeah, not to diminish anything you said about the safety of drivers, but I think what the officer was saying to you and didn't say very well was that that little phrase he uses there is in fact part of the law. That's the only consideration they can have. I know it doesn't appear very sympathetic from me, but that's what the legislation says. But if you don't mind, I've got a question for everybody here.
Absolutely, yes.
When we're talking about the Deregulation Act, does anybody think that they're going to get that cat back in the bag?
Eventually, I think it'll have to be.
I think if it carries on the way it is, and we're wrong, and the cat is out of the bag, and you can operate anywhere you like in the country with the cheapest licence, with the easiest access, and the longest term of vehicle, I think that we're all going to start shopping around for the cheapest, nastiest place to get licensed, and I think that the standards that are going to be prevalent in the industry are going to be pre-1976 levels.
Let's just have to give a straw poll. There's 25 people thereabouts from the audience. As to Des's question at you then, will the cats be put back in the bag? Can we have a yes or a no?
Yes.
Anyone to comment? No? No?
I'll say something. Too many people on brown envelopes and government will never get it.
Okay, so...
Yeah, good afternoon. I'd like to say something if possible. On the task and finish group, 34 recommendations, the panel that sat on that group, Venerable Donna being one of them, there is an item, there is a recommendation that the government did not realise the problems that this Deregulation Act would cause. I agree with the gentleman in the corner there that's praised the work of the DFT, because we have got a good at long last, we have got a good DFT department. But listening to a lot of these people in here, we seem to have missed one very important point. We are all stakeholders. We contribute to this industry. We've got to spend money on expensive vehicles. We have no help whatsoever from our councils. Most of the councils are an absolute load of rubbish. I'm going to put Donna on the spot here. On this very worrying guidance document, Donna, how many councils do you know would accept this document?
To our knowledge, not one council has ratified the entire guidance document as an entity. All right. There are, I'm sure, several who are looking at it. I'm absolutely certain as well that those councils who belong to the opposition group of licensing officer associations would not ever adopt it. So that rules those out for a start. It will not get 100% ratification. We're still looking into the possibility of how many have or will, but we have not heard yet of one.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for your participation. That concludes our seminars for this year. I thank you all for attending throughout the day. And may I thank our panel on the QA Forum, Des Broster, Dave Lorry, Amir Hassan, Donna Schultz, Perry McMillan and Mark Jennings. Thank you very much for your time.